Hi, this is my review of The Frontier. This is a post-apocalyptic role-playing game trying to emulate or recreate the magic of video games such as Borderlands or Destiny. And even though I have never played Destiny, I've seen videos, but I never got into it. I really enjoyed my time playing Borderlands 1 and 2, especially 1 because even though Borderlands 2 was good, I didn't like the changes that they brought about to the plotline, the general flavor or mood of the game. But I loved playing Borderlands, just going through the wasteland, killing all of those enemies, either beasts or mercenaries or thugs or whatever, and you kill them and suddenly loot, multicolored loot popped out from them, different weapons, ammo, pieces of gear. And I was so excited because the loot came in different colors like oranges and bright purples and such. They had like a neon tone to them. That is the names of the different pieces of gear and weapons. And so you felt like you were breaking a piñata and you were picking up candy. So it was really nice. And I think this role-playing game, The Frontier, recreates that experience perfectly. And just take a look at the cover, right? Over here in the upper part it says burn, slash, cut, incinerate, shoot, maul, vaporize, maim, slaughter, electrocute, rend, blast, and disintegrate your way through the frontier. A shoot and loot role-playing game. So the frontier focuses on cool exploration and combat. This is quite action driven. And yes, you can also interact with the world around you, with non-player characters, with anything at all, in a non-violent way. But I think this game really shines when it comes to combat encounters. So take that into mind if you want to play like a slow political drama in the post-apocalyptic world, and I don't think this is the game for you. Now, let's talk about the quality of the PDF. This PDF is a labor of love. The document is fully bookmarked. Oh, and before we get further into things, I must tell you right now, all of the expansions are available for free. I actually purchased all of them it was last year, at the end of last year, because there was a really good sale. But right now they are all available for free. So I recommend that you go and download all of them right away, because you never know, maybe they are not free after a few weeks or months, and you would be missing your chance. All of those expansions contain additional classes, additional weapons if I'm not mistaken, a lot of things. I haven't gone through all of the different volumes, which are compilations of previously released expansions, but now if you want to play the Frontier, you will only need to pay for the core book. So even if you're not playing the Frontier, I recommend that you download the free material right now, because it could serve as inspiration or even mechanically for other role-playing games in a post-apocalyptic setting. Well, let's continue talking about the quality. As I was saying, the document is fully bookmarked, so it's really easy to navigate the entire document. It's 105 pages and you have awesome looking illustrations. The choice of illustrations to represent different situations, when they talk about the classes and the gear and the story, the art is perfect. The graphic design is very clear. It's quite easy on the eyes overall. It's one of those documents that you read and a few minutes pass and you're almost finished with the document. And you, of course, you do not need to read all of it. You only need to read what is important, just get familiarized with the setting, with the core rules, and just take a look at some of the classes and the gear and the enemies, and you're all set to go. This even includes an adventure at the end. So this is a role-playing game that in about an hour, 2 hours most, you're going to be completely familiarized with all of the content. Probably less. I actually didn't take the time that it took to understand this role-playing game, but this is one of the easiest to understand RPGs out there, in my opinion. And this brings about a sort of like a dichotomy. On one hand, as I was saying, this is a really streamlined, easy to use system, but on the other hand, the book contains no information at all as to how you play a role-playing game or how to act as a game master. They actually make it clear at the beginning of the book that they tell you that you should be familiarized with how a role-playing game functions or runs. So if you are new to role-playing games, I recommend that you watch a couple of YouTube videos telling you what RPGs are all about, or perhaps visit some websites, and then you can use this book to play your first RPG session. It's going to be quite easy, especially because, as I was saying, this RPG, The Frontier, is based mostly on video games. So the quality is top notch, and I actually didn't find any typos, any errors. You even have character sheets for each class. It's really good, really high quality. Now let's talk about the contents. First, you have a small introduction as to what this game is. It's basically, you could say, a D20 based game, but there are some modifications. Some things that you could say it combines old school with some streamlined new school sensibilities. Oh, and I forgot to mention that the table of contents is also hyperlinked. Now, the quality, awesome, excellent. Now, let's talk about the setting. What is the Frontier? What is the game world, or rather the worlds? The Frontier takes place in the 23rd century. By this time, humanity has had great advancements in science and technology. They still have a long way to go to cover other necessities or problems, but the advancement in technology has made it possible for mankind to travel to the moon and Mars and other places with relative ease. But there is another mysterious element brought into the story. You have extraterrestrial archaeological artifacts of this unknown civilization. It is thought that this civilization has conquered or been to many places in the galaxy. There is a lot of speculation about it. And for a lack of a better name, they have called these people the Prometheans. So as mankind started to look into the Promethean civilization, the remnants, the ruins, the artifacts, they discovered that they left behind some gates in space. Now these jump gates allowed you to move relatively quickly and safe from one place to the other in outer space. So humanity decides to take a chance, send an exploration team through one of these gates, and at the other end they found a planet very much like planet Earth. Perhaps a bit more on the warm side of things, a bit more desertic, but it's quite inhabitable, and it contains a lot of ruins and artifacts from these mysterious Prometheans. So they actually named this planet Prometheus. So a colonization effort was put into work, and a lot of people were sent through the gate with purposes of colonizing this new planet. And things started to go quite well, but there was an incident, a hazard related to this gate that connected Prometheus to the gate closest to planet Earth. And the gate basically shattered, it kind of like exploded, emitting some waves that either destroyed or completely annihilated the ships around it. It also affected the planet. Many of the advancements and civilization on Prometheus, that brought by humans from planet Earth, was destroyed, shattered, ruined, and all of the inhabitants of Prometheus, all of the colonists who should still have contact with planet Earth, were left stranded on Prometheus with no knowledge whatsoever of what happened, if they would ever be able to contact planet Earth or return to it perhaps. They were left on their own. And Prometheus is not an entirely safe place. Even though you have a breathable atmosphere, they actually give you some technical details as to the gravity, the temperature. There are hostile life forms and many mysteries surrounding Prometheus, especially related to the alien artifacts and ruins. But also because you have this group of people living in the planet, they started to clash for power over Prometheus. So you have certain groups, some of them more militaristic than others, because for example you have this group that established a city known as Bethlehem, and they represent the official government over Prometheus. But immediately when the gate incident happened, they started to rule with an iron fist. They started to force all of the inhabitants of Prometheus, all of the different cities surrounding Bethlehem, to pay tribute, to pay steep taxes and obey draconic rules. And if they did not do that, of course, there will be violent consequences. So you have information on all of the major settlements and the population, but you can see that Bethlehem work a bit like the bad guys of the setting. There are also many other stranded in Prometheus that decided to form gangs of bandits, thugs, different criminal groups. There are also mercenaries. Anything that you can imagine that you have seen of a post-apocalyptic nature, you can find it here. You have extensive information on geographical features like the 3 lakes, different mountains, marshes, all of the information concerning the temperature of the water, what types of threats or hazards you could find in a certain area. It could be like a natural hazard, or it could also be a place where there are a lot of bandits or gangs. And you can also tell some places, perhaps places that serve as mining facilities. You could probably find a lot of enforcers from Bethlehem there. All of the places where you can find resources have potential encounters with the other inhabitants of the planet. You also have information on the government that I was saying, that there is a sort of like a standoff with people of the different cities, somewhat grudgingly paying tribute to Bethlehem, and those that do not are in conflict with Bethlehem. And you can also tell that there could be potential disagreements between the different settlements. So this is a setting with a lot of problems, and of course that means there is a lot of opportunity for the adventurers, for the player characters, be they mercenaries or just people trying to survive, to obtain some coin, working for different factions, or just trying to make a living, perhaps trying to build their own settlement or city. You have details on transportation and the currency, because here you have something called the iridium dollar, which is basically a 10 milligram piece of iridium encased in a copper shell. And then we have information on the game rules. This is a very simple system. Almost all of the checks are basically resolved by rolling your 20-sided die. You make a roll, you add a modifier, which is basically one of your stats. And let's say you have 4 of muscles, so you roll, maybe you roll a 10 plus 4, 14 against a task. For example, easy tasks could be of a difficulty of 10, so you will need to roll 10 or above that. That is with your die roll and your modifier. But maybe something is really difficult too, so maybe you need to roll a 26 or a 30. And if you roll a natural 20, that's of course a success, but a natural 1 is a natural failure, an automatic failure. Now, maybe you could be thinking, this is probably old school Dungeons and Dragons, post-apoc style. But there are some things that make it a bit different. Because for example, you have multiple dice. If you were successful perhaps in an attack roll, rolling your 20-sided die, you would get to roll a number of dice to determine the damage that you deal. But you do not add all of those dice together. Let's say that you roll 3 6-sided dice, you take the highest number rolled. However, there is also exploding dice, and this is indicated by a capital D in the stats of the weapons or attacks that you are using. This exploding dice means that you can roll another die and you add half of what you get to the final total, because for example, maybe you rolled an 8 and then you rolled an 8 again. You will be adding 4, because 4 is half of 8, and you will be able to roll another die again until you stop rolling the maximum amount that you can roll in that particular die. So that's a really awesome way to simulate that over-the-top damage that you usually deal in video games. And I'm only familiar, as I was telling you, with Borderlands, but if you see some similarities between this and Destiny, Let me know in the comment section below. But I think these mechanics of exploding dice and multiple dice fits the theme of Borderlands quite perfectly. You also have modifiers, of course, and multipliers depending on different factors. It could be the type of weapon that you are using. It could be anything else, circumstances surrounding a particular task, environment, and such. Now, when it comes to attributes, you have 4 broad categories. You have muscles, which represents anything that has to do with you acting over something in the game world through your toughness, your strength, your endurance, etc. You also have reflexes, which has to do with coordination and quickness. You also have brains, that is basically concerning intelligence, attentiveness, concentration. You have guts, that measures willpower, determination, strength of personality. It also has to do with the use of psionic powers. So as you can see, these are just 4 broad categories, not going too much into specifics, just to get the game going and keep the action flowing. You could have an attribute that is on 0, which is terrible, but you could also have 6 or higher, and that will be superb. And this is the value that you're going to add to your D20 roll. So this is quite easy. You want to make a check, maybe you need to roll 15 or above, you just make a D20 roll and you add your attribute, and that's it. You also have defense scores that are based on these attributes. Evasion is based on reflexes, resolve is based on guts, and toughness on muscles. Now you have a health value, of course, and this determines how much damage you can take before going down. Usually when you get to 0, your character is knocked out, but you can get killed if you receive too much negative damage after that. Now let's talk about creating a character, which is quite simple. There is an option for random attribute generation, but you can also use a point-buy system. So first you determine your attributes by dividing a number of points among them, and then you pick a class. Then you calculate your health and your starting gear, and you're all set. This core rulebook contains 4 character classes, but as I was saying, right now it's a really cool time because all of the other classes that you had to pay for before are available for free, so go get them. And some of them are actually really cool. I really like the Juggernaut archetype because it reminds me of Brick, one of the characters in Borderlands. That was my favorite character, that and the ninja, I forget his name. But all of the characters that you see in Borderlands has either a class that is just like them or almost like them. Now when it comes to leveling up, you obtain a certain amount of experience points, and of course as you go up, your abilities become better. You actually become harder to kill based on your level. That is, even after they have reduced you to 0 hit points, you become quite tough. And as I was saying, this is a setting that feels more like an emulation of a video game. So you have these really over-the-top characters, probably enhanced in many conventional and non-conventional ways. So keep that in mind when you take damage and deal damage. And you can improve your attributes too as you level up. Now when it comes to gaining experience, you gain experience by killing enemies, by fulfilling objectives in your missions, or just obtaining personal experience. Maybe you're a really good role player, or you did some really good contributions to the progress of the mission, or for the benefit of the group. The Game Master could award you additional experience points. Let's talk a bit about the classes. Many of them could be considered staples of different post-apocalyptic games, specifically in video games. First, you have the Commando. Now, the Commando is one of the best combatants in the game. You start out with a lot of health, not the best health that is reserved for the Juggernaut, and you're trained in the use of all sorts of armor and weapons. Your starting gear is also quite versatile. If you wanted to have a commando that specializes in long-ranged attacks, you can do that, but you can also fight up close and personal with your shotgun and your dagger. You could also use grenades. Now when it comes to the Commando abilities, talking about them in a general sense, they all have to do with carrying out extra attacks per round. You are also really tough to kill. You have some options that you can change or swap during each combat encounter, gaining a bonus, for example, to attack rolls, or gaining improved evasion. There are 4 options. So you can see there is a strategic element to playing as the commando, because you will have to plan during each round what will be more effective at carrying out. Maybe during a certain action you are pinned down and maybe you want to put extra effort on evasion, or maybe you're carrying out an all-out attack, then it will be wiser to spend some points, these are veteran points that you can spend on bonus to your attacks. And later on you truly become a force to be reckoned with. You could attack multiple times with bonuses to your attack and damage. Now then we have the next class, which is the Shadow. This is an expert infiltrator and troubleshooter. You're not exactly the assassin, although you can work as an assassin. You are more about acting as a scout or infiltrator. So you have decent health, not too good on the armor department, but you do have a good selection of weapons. Now this class is about being stealthy, about killing or eliminating targets without others noticing. In fact, as you go up in levels, it's going to be quite easy for you to kill an enemy and hide immediately. Normally you cannot hide when the enemies are looking at you. The Shadow is a class that specializes in misdirection, confusing your enemies. You're also an expert at dealing critical damage, attacking vital areas that will make your enemies less effective in combat even if you do not kill them right away. So if you wanted to play like a ninja type of character, the Shadow is the class for you. Then we have the Wirehead. Now the Wirehead feels like a jack of all trades, but at the same time as a wild card type of character, because this is basically a cyberpunk type of individual with implants hooked up to his cortex. So you can load different programs. These programs make you more effective at different types of tasks. Maybe you want to carry out an area scan, deal a shock burst, maybe you want to sabotage something, or maybe you want to emit a shock ray, maybe you want to hijack a system, or there is this really powerful program which is the Victory.exe, which makes you an incredible combatant. But every time you activate one of these programs, or rather load one of these programs, you have to carry out a swap action. And as you go up in levels, you have more options as to how you can carry out these swapping maneuvers. But there is always a chance that things could go wrong, so maybe some programs are not loaded correctly, and you actually work less efficiently in combat. So this is a character that is great for a wildcard type of situation where you want to risk it all, because I think in some areas it could even surpass the Commando and the Shadow, but this is not a given. So this is a character that you will play as being normal or less than average most of the time, and superb in some rare occasions. And then we have the Telepath. Now the Telepath is a bit like the caster of the group. This is a psionic type of character. When we compare it to, for example, the Wirehead has low health, but more selection when it comes to armor and weapons and starting gear. And the Telepath does not have that. They are not trained in the use of armor, they have limited selection of weapons, and they are not those type of wildcard type of characters that suddenly they explode and they become like super fighters. But the telepathic abilities allow the Telepath to adapt to almost any situation and potentially deal a lot of damage even to armored opponents. So you have these psionic talents that work a bit like psionic abilities or spells in other post-apocalyptic games. So you have things such as fascination, psychic surgery. You could also work a bit like a healer. You also have telekinesis, mind bomb, kinetic lance, force wall, and implosion. So the Telepath can work both as a healer and a damage dealer in the group. This is a very flexible, perhaps the most flexible of the character classes in the core rulebook, but that also means that you are the most fragile. So you definitely want to keep that in mind as you use your psionic powers, and keep track of your psi points, which are the currency that you will use to employ your psionic capabilities and powers. Let's talk about combat. Combat is split in rounds, and each round lasts about 6 seconds in the game world. And during that time, everybody's going to be attacking, shooting, running, dodging. So 10 rounds equals 1 minute. You determine your initiative by making a roll, and enemies have a fixed initiative. But initiative changes each round, so don't feel too disappointed if you rolled quite low during a round. You could do better next time. You also have details on when you surprise your opponents, or when you are surprised, you have to carry out a reflex roll to manage to act during that initial strike. And then you have information on the duration of effects and actions and movement. Basically, each round you can take one action and one move. And you can carry out close attacks or ranged attacks, and actions are quite flexible as well. If you're trying to move through an open door, that's not going to take an action. You could move and still attack or make any other thing, activate a device perhaps. But if the door is closed and you want to kick it down, that could take an action, of course, in addition to your movement. And you can also move after, for example, maybe you want to shoot and then move behind cover, you can do that. The attributes handle different things. If you're carrying out a close combat attack, that has to do with muscles. If you're carrying out a ranged attack, that has to do with reflexes. You could say that many of the finer points in combat are not taken into account in this combat rule set, but this is also clarified at the introduction of the Frontier, that this is a game about rulings rather than hard set rules. You do have a structure, but there are just so many things that could happen in combat. When it comes to the type of experience that this game tries to represent, that is emulating a video game, but at the same time being a role-playing game, giving you that freedom, not being trapped by a rule set. So you will have to figure out some situations on your own. You also have information on critical hits. That is, if you roll a 20, you deal more damage. You also have information on explosives that are quite devastating in this game. They always deal, at the very least, half damage, but they're also quite expensive to obtain. You have information on how to use 2 weapons. If you want to dual wield, you have a penalty, but you can attack with both of your weapons. You also have information on being stunned, all sorts of elemental damage. That is acid, cold, electric, fire. They all have some effects when you are affected by them. Maybe acid will corrode your armor little by little. Cold damage slows you down. Fire keeps harming you for a number of rounds, etc. And psionic is quite devastating when it comes to damage. Your armor cannot block it. And this is a good thing to consider, because you have an armor bonus that adds to your defense, but you could also use just your defense attribute as well. So sometimes it's actually better to, even if you have a lower defensive value when you're just using your natural defense, maybe you have 4, but with your armor you actually have 8, it could be worth to use in fact it's the only way to avoid psionic damage, by using your normal defensive value. Because when you carry out an attack, this is just like any other check. Maybe you see this opponent that has a value of 14, that is 10 plus his 4 defense. You need to roll 14 or above to hit that enemy. Then you have details on injury and death. As I was saying, when you are taken to 0 health, you are knocked down. You are unconscious. But if you take too much damage after that, you will die. You also have information on damage resistance and immunity. Damage resistance lowers the damage that you take from a particular elemental source by half. So if you are, for example, resistant to fire, you only take half of damage. But immunity makes you completely immune to that type of elemental damage. You have details on specific hazards such as conflagrations, dehydration, exposure, falling, starvation, suffocation, etc. And you also have some tips on how to handle other stuff, like being sneaky, carrying out feats of strength, interacting with other people, noticing things, and such. Anything that has to do with navigating in the game world and interacting with the people within it. Now let's talk about gear. This is one of the coolest sections of the book. As I was saying, in Borderlands, it was such a pleasure to just break apart your different enemies, and all of these multicolored pieces of loot would come out, and you were always crossing your fingers hoping for that very rare weapon or a piece of gear that give you an advantage against any enemy. Because just like Borderlands, here you have a rarity of items. You have common, uncommon, rare, exotic, and legendary items. Now, as I was saying at the beginning when I mentioned the dichotomy of the frontier, this is not a section that is going to be easy to handle for those that have just started to play RPGs, if they haven't seen a video or if they haven't read a book or a website about how to play RPGs. Because even though you have a lot of weapons and armor and items, you do not have tables to randomly determine what the player characters will get during their different encounters, when they kill an enemy or when they are successful at different tasks, objectives. So you will have to make your own tables. And some of these weapons are quite powerful. If you're not careful, if you do not take some balance into account, they could break the adventure that you are running. The player characters could win many battles quite easily if the weapon they are using is just too much for the enemies. So you do have like a benchmark table telling you how powerful a weapon is or a piece of gear based on levels. Because for example, a rare weapon could be a good weapon for a level 3 character or higher, but a legendary weapon is 7 or higher. So you have to think about that. If you want to add some more powerful weapons or armor or other items, that would be okay, but if it's just a small quantity of them, I would recommend, for example, making a 12-sided die roll, and if every time they perhaps open some sort of cache or suitcase or anything that they find in the post-apocalyptic world of Prometheus, maybe they need to roll that 12 to gain an exotic item when they are tackling an adventure that should be about level 4. And it's up to you to determine how often the characters get that piece of loot that they have always dreamed of. So you have details on how to handle and use the different weapons and armor. You actually have the number of turns, that rather combat rounds, that it takes for you to put on armor and take it off, how to swap your weapons, trade items. You have details on different armor types. Some armor is quite light, like for example recon armor. It's not as protective, but you won't have penalties if you're being acrobatic and trying to be stealthy. But as you get the other heavier weapons such as battle armor or the plated armor, you will have added protection, but you will have a heavy penalty, a severe penalty when it comes to being stealthy and athletic. Now let's talk about some of the special armor that you can find. There are just a lot of them, and I like it that they color-coded different types of armor and weapons, because it takes me back to that Borderlands type of experience. You have, for example, the Aegis battle armor that adds protection. You also have the Behemoth, which adds protection, but it's even more effective against elemental damage. And each type of these pieces of armor has different models. So your Aegis could be quite different from the Aegis of your other party members, or even your enemies, because for example you have the Aegis that is adds additional protection against explosive weapons, but there's also the Aegis that gives you no penalty to athletics and stealth rolls. So this is great despite being a heavy set of armor. You also have armor such as the Berserker, that it's great for close quarters combat and your straight gunfights, because as you take damage you get to do even more damage and you get a bonus to your attacks. You have the Darwin armor that allows you to adapt to different types of elemental damage per combat round. You have the Hotshot that allows you to be more effective at ranged attacks. You have the Hercules that gives you a bonus when carrying out close quarters combat attacks. There are just so many types of armor: the Ogre, the Panzer, the Retribution, and each one with 6 different variations. That's a lot of stuff. You could play the Frontier over and over and over again, and you will feel like you haven't seen all that there is to it when it comes to the loot. And that's not even taking into account the expansions. because you have additional weapons and armor with the classes that comes in the companion volumes to the Frontier. And then we have information on weapons, and each type of weapon, being ranged weapon or melee type of weapon, has its own details, because for example the assault rifle, even though it's quite damaging and really good to be used from afar, you need to hold it with both hands. And if you want to shoot out small bursts, you need to spend additional ammo. Very different from the bazooka, that if you do not brace yourself, that is, you sacrifice your move to brace yourself, you take a penalty to your attack. And you take an entire move and action to load a new rocket. So you have details on each of these type of weapons. Now let's talk about the special weapons with each of some of the variations. You have the Alchemist, and the Alchemist gives you a bonus to your attack to inflict acid damage. You even have Molecular Acid. You basically roll a couple of 6-sided dice to determine additional effects of damage. You also have different models, such as for example the heavy one, which is even more harmful, but you have the nasty one that gives you a bonus when trying to carry out critical hits. That is, if you, instead of rolling a 20, you only need to roll a 19, unless some other factors are involved. You also have some really weird things, because you have this rare grenade, the Bad Medicine. You toss this grenade and it explodes and damages your enemies, but for each target damage you also have a chance to heal one of your allies, and this falls into the weird science type of weaponry, because a lot of these weapons are actually remnants or relics from the Prometheans, from that strange alien civilization that you only know hints about. You also have other things, such as a 6-shooter, which is the Bloodhound, that tracks anyone damaged by it for a number of hours, and has some variations, because for example maybe the bullets inflict fire damage, or maybe you have no penalty when attacking with 2 weapons. You have a Bloodhound in each hand. These weapons and different special armor can be purchased, but in some very rare instances, maybe only in the larger cities and the black market, because these are very strange weapons, very unusual weapons to find. You also have things such as, for example, the Butcher, which is a combat shotgun, deals a lot of damage. You also have some other things that make you quite effective as a sniper, like the Comet Marksman Rifle. You also have some other things like the Double Whammy, which is a rare needler. Does a lot of damage, but it consumes a lot of ammo. Now, ammo in this game is handled in an abstract way. For example, a 6-shooter can carry out 3 shots before you need to reload it. That's because it takes into account that maybe you carried out 2 shots and only one of those managed to hit. And with all of those variations, some of these weapons hold extra ammo. Many of them deal elemental damage. Some of them may actually inflict some effects on your opponents. Maybe you stun them or you paralyze them in some way. So just like the armor section, you could kill hundreds and hundreds of enemies and open every case, explore any nook and cranny in the game world, and you will still feel like you haven't found everything that there is to it. And you also have some special melee weapons too, like the Rotos Sword. This is an uncommon sword that you can actually spend ammo to have it deal a lot more damage. You also have some other things like the uncommon dagger Serpentine. The Serpentine has poison. Overall, I think that combat in this game is more geared or focused on ranged combat, but if you want to handle some close quarters combat situations, then you should choose the Shadow or the Juggernaut. You also have information on other items, such as different ammo clips and medkits, combat stimulants, neural cocktails that will improve your actions in battle. And then we have a section detailing enemies. These enemies are perfect for any post-apoc setting that you can think of. Even if you don't want to use the setting of the Frontier, maybe you want to play Borderlands tabletop version if you know enough of the lore, and you could do that, because you have different broad categories of enemies with variations. Because for example, we have the bandits, and in the bandit category we have the bully that focuses on intimidation. We have the chief, the gunslinger, the junkie. So each of these enemy types has some sort of special ability or characteristic to it. Because for example, the junkie attacks with a machete, so it's a really dangerous enemy up close and personal. And the gunslinger gets to attack several times per round. The chief actually has like a special kick attack that could actually make you fall prone. Some of the enemies push you around or intimidate you, so you are less effective when attacking them. When it comes to drags, which are basically like reptilian wolves of sorts, you have the alpha, the charger, very nasty up close and personal. Some of them can actually push you back. You also have mechs with heavy weaponry and armor, of course, such as the Dreadnought, the Eradicator, the Infiltrator. You have suicide bots, rocket drones. You also have mercs, such as battle engineers, grunts. All of the different enemy types are great because they are focused at different attacks. You never feel like they're just the same enemy with very slight variations. All of these variations will require some strategic and tactical thinking. Some of them are going to be more effective when fighting against them from afar or up close. Some of them may activate some weird abilities. There are some psionic enemies. They may actually use some devices that will hinder your movement or your aim. You also have the Zvera, which are basically like primitive lizard men. And these are very low on technology, but they are quite monstrous. You have things such as the Adept, the Bowman, the Ogre. Some of them are kind of like a shaman type of enemy that can do some special attacks, and a lot of them can run at you, and you're going to have some tense situations in which you are just unloading clips and clips, and the monsters simply won't stop coming because of their tough scales or hide. You also have the Zorak, which are basically like insect type of creatures. So you want to have like aliens in Prometheus with all of those gross hives, and perhaps they kidnap people and eat them, or for any purpose needed in the campaign. You should use a Zorak for those types of situations. And at the end of the book, you have Hard Times for Prosperity. This is a complete first level adventure, and I'm not going to spoil the story or how the adventure will proceed, because there are probably players watching this review. But I can tell you that it feels a lot like a Borderlands type of adventure. There's even a character that reminds me of Dr. Zed from Borderlands. Keeping your insides inside. That type of character. But there are many situations in this adventure. You have moments where you have to defend a place. Sometimes you are on the offensive. There's going to be investigation and exploration. And I think that this adventure, it would be great if you can run it with a sort of like a dark humor sort of feel to it, because in Borderlands, that's one of the things that I loved about Borderlands, that the game had this sort of like a dark humor or sort of sarcasm to the entire situation, and I think this adventure is perfect for that, as you go through different installations and natural environments, fight all sorts of creatures, mutants, animals, all sorts of enemies, and interact with the crazy characters within this region. And you have maps for all of the places of the adventure. This game can be played on the theater of the mind side of things, but I think it's going to be a lot more fun to play it with miniatures. It's all up to you. So what do I think of The Frontier? This is probably the best post-apocalyptic role-playing game that you can play right now if you want to combine some old-school elements with new-school streamlined sensibilities, and you want to add some video game atmosphere to it. You have 4 basic classes, but many other classes at the moment of this review, as I am telling you. All of the expansions are available for free. Go and get them. This is a game of rulings, not rules, but that doesn't mean that there is no strategy or tactics involved. All of the different classes play quite differently. There is not much room for customization as your character develops. You can swap some pieces of weapons and gear. Maybe that is if 2 players decide to play as commandos. One commando could specialize in long-range combat. The other one could be specialized more up close with a shotgun and knife. But it's better if you mix the different abilities of the different classes, because if you want to play as a long-range combatant or more on the stealthy side of things, I think the Infiltrator would be better for that. And so party composition is a thing here. As you proceed through the different battle encounters and you try to navigate your way through different traps and hazards, trying to reach your objective. But there are some considerations as to where you are going to use a particular power or ability when you are swapping your weapons according to the situation, but things are kept more streamlined. This is a game of simple rules, but that doesn't mean that there is no depth. It depends on the type of adventure, on the combat scenario, and how brutal your game master can get. So I definitely recommend that you get the Frontier. If you have been playing role-playing games for a while, even if you have just played 2 or 3 sessions, sure, you can run the Frontier. But if this is your first time trying to explore the wonderful realm of role-playing games, I recommend that you watch some videos or read something as to how to play an RPG first, because otherwise you won't know how to run the Frontier. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.